It's fascinating that the president used the word BS to describe the case against him, which resulted in dozens of criminal convictions, because that was the same word that his own Attorney General, William Barr, used to describe his deranged claim that he had won the 2020 presidential election when Joe Biden beat him by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. That was the word that Attorney General Barr, even one of his greatest defenders, used to describe his delusional claims about how there was election fraud and election irregularities.
Señores, hoy veremos el perfecto ejemplo de cómo la política en los Estados Unidos se ha convertido en un circo. Si creías que ya lo habías visto todo, pues esperemos a comprender un poco lo que dijo Trump en el Departamento de Justicia. Sean bienvenidos a Políticamente en Desacuerdo. Amigos, hoy veremos a Jamie Raskin criticando el discurso de Trump, explicándolo, este discurso ante el Departamento de Justicia, y afirmando cómo es que se viene otro hito sombrío en la expansión del autoritarismo. Así que los invito a que se queden hasta el final de este video porque veremos los detalles más importantes. Pues amigos, vamos a entrar directo al contexto, veremos lo más importante. Quiero que me acompañen a ver este clip donde veremos cómo es que Jamie Raskin nos demuestra, ¿no?, cómo Trump básicamente se victimiza, ataca a sus enemigos políticos y por supuesto ignora por completo las reglas democráticas. Veamos esto.
All right, well, welcome and thank you all for coming. The tirade we just witnessed is one more grim landmark in the spreading authoritarianism of this administration, and it is a brand new embarrassment to the once revered Department of Justice. It's fascinating that the president used the word BS to describe the case against him, which resulted in dozens of criminal convictions, because that was the same word that his own Attorney General, William Barr, used to describe his deranged claim that he had won the 2020 presidential election when Joe Biden beat him by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. That was the word that Attorney General Barr, even one of his greatest defenders, used to describe his delusional claims about how there was election fraud and election irregularities. No other president in American history has stood at the Department of Justice to proclaim an agenda of criminal prosecution and retaliation against his political foes. This thoroughly partisan and delusional diatribe was a staggering violation of the traditional boundary between independent criminal law enforcement and presidential political power. The speak we just witnessed is a desecration of the essential values of the storied department in every way. It's an insult to the thousands of professional lawyers who go to work at the Department of Justice every day to enforce the rule of law, not the personal vendettas and partisan games of a politician. President Grant and Congress created the Department of Justice in 1870, 5 years after the Civil War, in the throes of Reconstruction. It was an exercise of Congress's powers under Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, which had just been added to the Constitution 2 years before. The purpose of the department was to protect the newly freed African American population in the South against escalating violence by the Ku Klux Klan and unrepentant secessionists. Congress wanted to protect the voting rights of the emancipated population against racial disenfranchisement schemes. Now, the Department of Justice, which first set out to defend the rule of law against white supremacy and vigilante violence, has become a department of injustice, cruelty, favoritism, and unfairness. One of Trump's first acts was to try to nullify the very first sentence of the 14th Amendment, which establishes that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof is a citizen of the United States. And they tried to destroy that, leading to at least 4 federal courts invalidating this executive order. An Obama judge, a Biden judge, a Reagan judge, and even a Trump judge. And the Reagan judge said it was the easiest case he ever had to decide. You don't have to be a lawyer to know what's wrong with that executive order or any of the other ones. You just have to know how to read. And that judge was very clear about it. Now, until now, the basic concept of the rule of law in our history has been the idea that no one is above the law. There was, to be sure, law under King George, but it was a law that the monarch and the lords imposed on the rabble, the peasants and the poor, but it never applied to them. It never applied to themselves. In the 18th century, the American Revolution overthrew the kings, the lords, and the feudal barons to establish a nation where we would have a nation where all would be equal under the law. As Tom Paine put it, in the monarchies, the king is law, but in the democracies, the law is king. But amazingly, we now have a president in the 21st century who believes he's a king, and he believes that the king is the law once again. The first 7 weeks of this radical experiment in neo-monarchism has been a disaster for the rule of law and for the Constitution and for the First Amendment. There have been 120 federal cases filed against Donald Trump all over the country, and he has lost already in more than 40 courtrooms across the land where temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions have been issued against his lawless attack on the Constitution. This Department of Justice started out by empowering law enforcement. The original Department of Justice started out by empowering law enforcement against insurrectionists and extremists. This DOJ has started out by empowering insurrectionists and extremists against law enforcement. President pardon, I'm sure you think so, because President Trump pardoned more than 1,500 insurrectionists. All right. President Trump pardoned more than 1,500 insurrectionists, hundreds of whom were extremists who violently assaulted our police officers with stun guns, chemical spray, batons, broken furniture, fire extinguishers, and Trump flags. This Department of Justice has gone even further. And maybe he's got a pardon. That's why he's so excited today. I don't know. But this Department of Justice has worked aggressively to get courts to dismiss unrelated criminal charges against pardoned January 6 convicts. There are people who were pardoned on January 6 who have had cocaine charges, well, they're January 6 felons who've had cocaine charges, drug charges, gun charges, sawed-off shotgun charges, hand grenade charges against them dismissed by this Department of Justice. And that was never covered by the original pardon. At Trump's Department of Justice, law and order means Trump will twist the law for you if you take orders from him. And that's, of course, what they did with Mayor Adams. And maybe I'll take a break here and I'll have something to say at the end about the Adams prosecution and the other people who've been let go as they've barreled through a pro-corruption agenda at the Department of Justice. But let me say this. Donald Trump has sacked more than a dozen of DC's best career criminal prosecutors because they worked to successfully convict January 6 insurrectionists, many of them members of extremist groups and violent street gangs. This makes no sense. They're firing the best criminal prosecutors in Washington because they did their jobs against people like him. Congratulations, buddy. That's how the Nazis got started. You go have your own rally, all right?
Congressman, the Nazis on college campuses
All right. Now, I would now like to go to our originally scheduled program, if this gentleman would allow us to. I'm introducing Sean Brennan. I'm introducing Sean Brennan, who's a former assistant.
Ok, amigos, analicemos esto parte por parte, ¿no? Donald Trump en el Departamento de Justicia prácticamente lo que soltó fue un berrinche disfrazado de un discurso político. Lo primero que hace es descalificar la institución, diciendo que es una vergüenza, ¿no? Que se usa con fines políticos en su contra. Pero a ver, ¿será que el Departamento de Justicia es una vergüenza simplemente porque están haciendo su trabajo o están procesando a criminales? Porque recordemos que este mismo Departamento de Justicia procesó a varias personas de su administración y muchas fueron condenadas. Pero claro, según Trump, todo es una cacería de brujas, ¿no? Y también él utilizó esta forma de utilizar el lenguaje, ¿no? Se presentó como una víctima dentro de un sistema corrupto, cuando en realidad lo que está pasando es que el sistema está funcionando. Si el Departamento de Justicia se encargó de condenar a miembros de su círculo, eso no significa que sea injusto. Significa que nadie está por encima de la ley. Y eso es algo que parece que Trump le cuesta entender. Veamos otro punto clave que son los indultos, ¿no? Donald Trump perdonó a estos 1.500 insurrectos, individuos condenados por el ataque al Capitolio. Aquí es donde se pone peligroso porque no estamos hablando de indultos normales. Estamos hablando de un presidente que prácticamente ha apremiado a personas que participaron en un intento de golpe de Estado. Un golpe de Estado. La cereza del pastel es que sigue teniendo este apoyo, ¿no? O sea, hay personas que hasta salen a aplaudir estas decisiones. Esto nos puede llevar a una serie de preguntas claves. ¿Será que la sociedad está tan mal que ya nos acostumbramos a la corrupción política? O sea, ¿en qué momento se volvió normal que un presidente ataque instituciones democráticas, salga a premiar a insurrectos, manipule el discurso para presentarse como la víctima? Seamos claros. Lo que estamos viendo, amigos, no es una simple pelea política, es un ataque directo contra las bases democráticas de un país. Donald Trump no es un líder incomprendido. Es alguien que intenta socavar el sistema desde adentro, usando su influencia, terminando deslegitimando la justicia, simplemente cuando no le favorece, ¿no? Pero bueno, aquí quiero escuchar las opiniones de ustedes. ¿Qué creen ustedes? ¿Creen que el Departamento de Justicia está actuando con justicia o que realmente hay una persecución política como lo dice Trump? Los leo en los comentarios, no se olviden de dejarme sus opiniones. Como siempre, muchísimas gracias por acompañarme hasta el final de este video. Recuerden que si me quieren apoyar, regálame un like, suscríbete a nuestro canal Políticamente en Desacuerdo y nos vemos en el próximo video. Hasta luego.